Uzora was a land built on rules. Rules that only applied to its women. From childhood, the maidens were taught to protect their virtue at all costs, while the men indulged themselves beyond the village borders. They returned home with stories of their conquests, boasting among themselves, never questioned, never punished. For as long as history had been told, a woman's purity was the pride of her family. A bride had only one duty on her wedding night, to prove her worth. If she failed, the consequences were dire. A husband could reject her, take another wife, or cast her out with nothing. No one questioned this law. No one dared. The village women whispered among themselves, but never too loudly. Mothers raised their daughters with a singular warning. Your virtue is your life. Girls were watched closely, their every movement scrutinized. Before marriage, no man was to touch them. The elders ensured it. At 17, Zara was the pride of her family. Her beauty was spoken of beyond Uzora, her skin like polished ebony, her smile rare but striking. Many men sought her hand, and when the wealthy hunter Dinta chose her, her family rejoiced. Her mother, Mama Uju, prepared her for her wedding night, teaching her the ways of a wife, but Zara hid a terrible secret, one that could cost her everything. Months before, under the cover of darkness, she had met with a stranger, a traveler. She had listened to his stories, his voice weaving a different world from the one she knew. And one night, against all reason, she had given herself to him. Now, as her wedding day approached, fear consumed her. She had heard of what happened to women who were found unworthy. Just last year, Neka, a young bride, had been dragged from her husband's home at dawn, thrown at the feet of the elders while her husband proclaimed her defiled. Her family, shamed beyond repair, had sent her away. No one spoke of her anymore. Zara could not suffer that fate. The evening of her marriage feast was grand. The drums sang deep into the night, and the people danced in the moon's golden glow. Dinta, her husband, watched her closely with a deep feeling of pride. She was now his, and soon he would have a taste of her brand new honey pot. As the night wore on, Zara's hands trembled. The moment of truth loomed. The village had a custom. At dawn, a white cloth would be displayed for all to see, proof of a woman's purity. If the cloth remained unstained, disgrace would follow. Zara's heart pounded as Dinta led her into their hut. The firelight flickered over his face, his firm hands patiently working her body. She knew she had no escape. Outside, the elders waited. Would Zara's secret be discovered? Would she be cast out, or had fate prepared another path for her? The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant sound of drums still echoing from the wedding feast. Inside the hut, Zara's heart raced. She knew the morning would bring either honor or disgrace. Dinta was close, watching her, expecting. But outside, unseen in the shadows, a different storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundation of Uzora. A year before Zara's wedding, a group of men had arrived in Uzora. They came as traders, bringing rare goods, fabrics, ornaments, spices. The village welcomed them, eager for business. These men, who called themselves the Omage brothers, were polite and respectful. They attended village gatherings, learned the customs, and even spoke of settling permanently. But their true purpose was hidden. Uzora's men were known for a secret indulgence. When they traveled to neighboring villages, they sought the company of women, paying them with gifts and coins. In the land of the Omage brothers, such women were called prostitutes, and they were treated with scorn. Yet, Uzora's men had taken pleasure in them, dishonoring their daughters and sisters. And so the Omage brothers had come, not to trade but to revenge. The revenge was subtle and patient. The Omage brothers had no interest in open conflict. They would let time deliver their justice. Instead of raising weapons, they chose a different path: seduction. Unknown to Uzora's elders, these men had spent the past year doing what no one believed possible. They had defiled the very law that the village held sacred. They whispered forbidden words into the ears of Uzora's young women, offering them the same gifts their fathers had once used to tempt Omage's daughters. Some of the girls had resisted. Others had not. Zara had not been the only one. As the village slept, the Omage brothers gathered at the edge of Uzora, watching the hut where Zara and Dinta lay. They knew what would happen in the morning, and they were ready. One of them, Kojo, a man with sharp eyes and a quiet smile, spoke to his brothers. "This is only the beginning." At dawn, as the first light of day crept over the hills, the elders, as was tradition, gathered in the village square waiting. The stained white cloth, the symbol of honor, would soon be displayed. But this time, something was different. A murmur passed through the crowd. A messenger had arrived from another household. Then another, and another. The same whispers carried through the village. The cloths had remained white. Too many white cloths. Suspicion spread like wildfire. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. It was impossible. Could it be that many young women had remained untouched? Or was something more sinister at play? Zara, wrapped in a cloth, stepped out of the hut, her face unreadable. Dinta followed behind her, his expression tight with pride. He had not raised the alarm. He had not cast her away. The elders frowned. Something was wrong. And then, just as the first elder stepped forward to confirm the cloth, a distant cry broke the morning calm. A woman's voice filled with terror. "My daughter is gone." The village turned. A mother had fallen to her knees, wailing. Her daughter, Tulu, had vanished in the night. And she was not the only one. The village of Uzora had been built on silence. Girls were raised to obey, to keep their voices low and their thoughts unspoken. But now, an unholy silence had settled over the land, one that carried secrets in the shadows. The Omage brothers had set out for revenge, believing the maidens of Uzora would exchange their bodies for gifts, as their own women had been used in the past. But something unexpected had happened. The girls were not driven by greed. They were driven by something far more dangerous: desire. At first, it had been a careful game. The Omage brothers had whispered sweet promises, offering trinkets and treasures. The first few girls hesitated, but once the forbidden fruit had been tasted and they felt the sweet sensation that had been kept from them, hesitation melted into hunger. And hunger spread like wildfire. No longer was it about the gold bracelets or fine fabrics. The girls of Uzora, raised to believe a man's touch was sacred and reserved only for marriage, had discovered a truth hidden from them all their lives. Pleasure was not a man's gift to a woman. It was hers to claim, and claim it they did. They sought out the Omage brothers at any slight chance they get, slipping away under the guise of fetching water or gathering firewood. They came not as beggars, but as willing participants. Some whispered their names in excitement, others in desperate need. By the time Zara's wedding night arrived, she was not alone in her deception. She was one of many. As the cries of missing daughters spread, more people gathered. The missing girls, Tolu, Ndidi, and Nkem, were all of marriageable age. Their absence was a sign of dishonor. Had they run away? Had they been stolen? Fear rippled through the village. The men clenched their jaws, their pride wounded. To lose a daughter before marriage was a disgrace beyond words. Their women, however, said little. The mothers of Uzora had watched their daughters grow restless over the past year, though none had dared to question it. The elders sent out search parties, but there were no trails, no signs of abduction. What no one knew was that the missing girls had not been taken. They had left on their own. The Omage brothers had set out to destroy Uzora's pride, to strip the village of its hypocrisy. But now, they found themselves entangled in something they had not foreseen. The girls no longer wanted revenge. They wanted more. More nights. More touches. More of what had been denied them. The brothers, once in control, now found themselves being pursued. The thrill of seduction was gone. Now they were hunted like prey, their evenings filled with endless visits from girls who no longer cared for secrecy. Kojo, the sharp-eyed leader, frowned as he watched the village from a distance. This was not the plan, he muttered. His brothers nodded in agreement. They had come to make the women of Uzora suffer as their own women had suffered. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous than lust. The women had discovered insatiable pleasure, and soon Uzora would burn for it. That night, the drums of Uzora beat louder than before. The search for the missing girls continued. but the elders knew they were losing control. Something was shifting, something unseen yet powerful. The air in Uzora had changed. What once was a village of quiet obedience had become a place of whispers, stolen glances, and restless nights. The women had suffered in silence for too long, watching their husbands and brothers indulge in pleasures denied to them. But now, the truth could no longer be ignored. The law, which demanded that a woman remain pure until marriage, had always been upheld with ruthless conviction. Yet the very men who enforced it had no discipline of their own. They traveled to distant villages, lavishing gifts upon women, feeding their own desires without consequence. The women of Uzora saw the hypocrisy, and they had had enough. It had started years ago, in hushed voices between trusted friends. Married women, their needs long dismissed, had turned to each other for comfort. What had begun as emotional support soon turned into something more. At first, it was only a few, but deprivation created hunger, and hunger spread. The bond between these women deepened into a secret network, a hidden world where the law could not reach them. Behind the walls of their homes, when their husbands were away, they found solace in each other's arms. It was not love in the way Uzora defined it, it was survival. Now, with the arrival of the Omage brothers and the unraveling of the village's purity, the married women saw an opportunity. They gathered in secret, speaking openly for the first time. "We do not seek to abandon discipline," said Maman Kechi, a respected elder's wife. "But we will not allow these men to chain us while they roam free." Heads nodded in agreement. If they can have pleasure, so can we. And so a plan was formed. The Omage brothers had expected to control the game, to bend Uzora's young women to their will. Instead, they had become prisoners of their own trap. The maidens no longer sought them for money. They sought them for pleasure. At first, the brothers enjoyed the attention, but soon it became too much. They could no longer move freely without being followed. Girls snuck out at all hours, desperate for another taste of what had been denied to them all their lives. Some cried when turned away, others grew bold and demanding. The brothers were drowning in desire they could no longer satisfy. And worse, the married women had noticed. If the law did not permit a maiden to be touched before marriage, it said nothing about a wife seeking pleasure elsewhere. One by one, they began testing the limits, drawing the Omage brothers deeper into a trap they had never expected. The brothers had thought they were the hunters, but now they were the hunted. Meanwhile, the elders of Uzora were struggling to contain the growing unrest. The disappearance of the maidens had created suspicion, but something even more alarming was happening. Wives were beginning to challenge their husbands. Some refused to be silent when their men left the village. Others stopped performing their wifely duties, withholding submission as an unspoken protest. Then came the first open defiance. One evening, in the center of the village square, a young bride named Amara confronted her husband before the entire community. "You go to other villages and take what is not yours, but you chain me like a slave," she cried. "If you are free, then so am I." Gasps filled the air. No woman had ever spoken such words aloud. Her husband, humiliated and enraged, raised his hand to strike her. But before the blow could land, another woman stepped forward. Then another, and another. The women of Uzora were no longer afraid. They had lived their entire lives under this law. But now the law was cracking, and soon it would shatter. For days, the search party had combed the forests and riverbanks, hoping to find the missing maidens. When they finally did, the entire village of Uzora gathered in shock. The girls, Tolu, Ndidi, and Kem, stood with their heads bowed, their bodies showing their current conditions. A silence heavier than thunder fell over the elders. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. The maidens had not been stolen. They had run away of their own will, and now they carried shame within them. Or so the elders thought. The maidens did not weep. They did not beg for forgiveness. Instead, they stood firm, their eyes fierce, as though they had nothing to regret. The Omage brothers were seized immediately. Bound with ropes, they were dragged before the elders, their faces calm despite the accusations. "You have dishonored our daughters," one of the elders roared. "You have defiled our land." But the leader of the Omage brothers, Kojo, only smiled. "No," he said. "We have only done to your women what your men have done to ours." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The elders stiffened, their expressions darkening. "What nonsense do you speak?" demanded one of the chiefs. "You call it nonsense?" Kojo's voice rose. "For years, the men of Uzora have come into our village, offering gifts to our sisters, our daughters, so they may take their pleasure with them. You use them, laugh behind their backs, and return to your homes to demand virgins for wives." Some of the women exchanged glances. They had always known, always suspected, but now it was being spoken aloud before the entire village. "You cannot demand purity from your women while you stain the women of others," Kojo continued. "We have done nothing but expose the truth." The elders turned their gaze to the 3 pregnant maidens. "Tell us, were you forced?" one of them asked. Tolu, her hands resting on her belly, raised her chin. "No," she said. "We chose this." Didi stepped forward. "You taught us to be ashamed of our desires. But when our men seek it elsewhere, you turn your heads." Kem added, "We have lived by your rules, but we are not blind. We know our fathers, our brothers, our husbands go to other villages. We know how they return, pretending to be righteous while their hands are stained." The elders were speechless. Then, from the crowd, another voice rang out. "They are not the only ones." All heads turned as a group of young women stepped forward, maidens who had not run away, yet bore the same secret. "We, too, have known the touch of a man," one of them said boldly. "We are not ashamed." A stunned silence followed. For generations, Uzora had prided itself on the purity of its daughters. But now it was clear, the law had already crumbled. A deep unease settled over the village. The men, once so confident in their authority, now shifted uncomfortably. The women, once silent, stood united. The Omage brothers had not only avenged their people, they had ignited a revolution. The elders had no choice but to face the truth. The law, as it stood, could no longer hold. Something had to change. But change would not come easily. The elders withdrew to deliberate, while the men of Uzora grumbled in anger, feeling the weight of their crumbling dominance. The women, now emboldened, waited. They would not back down. And the Omage brothers, though prisoners, watched with satisfaction. Uzora would never be the same again. The elders sat in council for 2 days, locked in deep deliberation. Uzora was at a breaking point. The truth had been unveiled, the law shattered, and now, a decision had to be made. One that would either restore order or throw the village into chaos. The Omage brothers had come seeking revenge, but they had unknowingly forced a reckoning. When the elders finally emerged, the village gathered in tense silence. The head elder, Okonkwo, stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "The law has been broken. It cannot be ignored. But neither can the truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "The maidens who have been found with child shall not be cast out," he continued. "Instead, those responsible for their condition must take responsibility." All eyes turned to the Omage brothers, who stood bound but unshaken. "You claim to have acted in revenge, but your actions have tied you to this land. You will not return to your village empty-handed. You will take as wives the women you have made mothers." Gasps of shock and disbelief erupted. Tolu, Didi, and Kem exchanged glances. This was not how they had imagined their futures, but their fate was now sealed. Kojo, the leader of the brothers, let out a low chuckle. "So, we came as traitors and leave as husbands? Very well. We are not cowards. We will stay." The other brothers, though some hesitated, nodded in agreement. The deal was struck, but the elders were not finished. Elder Okonkwo raised his hand, and the village fell silent once more. "We have seen what happens when laws are upheld with fear instead of wisdom," he said. "A woman's purity is not something to be dictated by force, but by understanding. From this day forward, we will no longer govern our maidens with silence. Instead, we will teach them." Eyes widened in shock. The young women of Uzora will learn of their bodies, of desire, and of consequences. They will know that with freedom comes responsibility. They will know that while they may choose, their choices will shape their futures. A woman must understand that she bears the greatest burden in the act of love. The burden of life. The burden of reputation. The men grumbled at this shift, but the women, both old and young, listened with keen interest. If a maiden chooses to lay with a man before marriage, she must be prepared for what follows. A child without a father. A home without honor. a life where she may not be seen as a woman of value. The words hung in the air like a solemn warning. The message was clear: you are free, but freedom has a cost. With the verdict set, the Omage brothers were freed and prepared for their marriages. Some of the maidens who had once secretly indulged in pleasure now looked on with cautious thought. They had enjoyed their rebellion, but now they understood. They would not be stoned, they would not be cast out, but neither would they be blindly protected. The law had changed, but the burden of choice remained. Some girls would continue to seek pleasure, knowing they could no longer be punished for it. Others would hesitate, weighing the risks against the rewards. And the men of Uzora, both husbands and suitors, now realized that their double standard had been exposed. They too had a price to pay. Uzora had changed, but whether for better or worse, only time would tell. What do you think about this story? Have you heard about something like this happening before? Please share with us in the comment section, and please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more good stories. See ya!